Welcome to Everyday Life Stories. Today we're diving into an incredible tale of hidden identity, justice, and courage that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about the people around you. This is a story about how the most unlikely person can become a hero when it matters most. Prologue. The storm that changes everything. The silence in the cockpit was deafening as the massive C-130 Hercules descended through the Arctic storm. Ice crystals battered the windshield like bullets, and below lay nothing but treacherous frozen wasteland. The wealthy elites who had mocked Elena Rivers at Skyline Aviation Academy were now passengers in her plane, their sneers replaced by terror. Just hours ago, they had called her a discount pilot and a charity case. Now their lives depended on the very woman they had tormented. What they didn't know was that Elena wasn't just any pilot. She was carrying a secret that would make their previous cruelty seem like child's play. Would justice finally be served at 10,000 feet above the Arctic ice? The scholarship student's arrival. Elena Rivers stepped off the shuttle bus at Skyline Aviation Academy, clutching her worn, military-issued duffel bag as bitter Alaskan wind cut through her thin jacket. The imposing structure loomed ahead, its windows reflecting endless ice and snow. But Elena's attention was immediately drawn to the clusters of well-dressed students unloading designer luggage from luxury SUVs. Her simple jeans, faded flannel shirt, and patched leather jacket marked her as different. The moment she entered the marble-floored lobby, everything changed. "Scholarship student," announced the registration clerk loudly enough for nearby conversations to pause. "You'll be in dormitory block C. That's the older building." The way she said it made clear that Block C was where they put students who didn't belong. Elena took her paperwork folder and kept her head down, methodically filling out forms while whispers and snickers swirled around her. She had expected this. Skyline's reputation for producing elite pilots meant it attracted elite students who measured worth in dollar signs and family connections. Sophia Blackwood stood near the massive windows, her platinum blonde hair catching fluorescent light as she surveyed new arrivals with calculating blue eyes. As heiress to Blackwood Industries and natural leader of the wealthy circle, she carried herself with the practiced confidence of someone never told no. "Look what the scholarship program dragged in this year," she murmured to her circle, voice carrying the particular cruelty that came from wealth and privilege. "I wonder if she even knows which end of a plane goes forward." Marcus Sterling lounged against the registration counter, the investment banker's son treating aviation like an expensive hobby between yacht club meetings. "My father says they're letting anyone in these days," he drawled loud enough for Elena to hear. "Apparently all you need is a sob story and willingness to work in the kitchen." His companions laughed, the sound sharp and cutting in the sterile air. Elena kept working on her forms, fingers brushing against the small sewing kit in her bag. Red thread wound carefully around its wooden spool. Her grandmother had taught her that dignity meant repairing what was broken, not throwing it away. "They think humiliation is their weapon," Elena thought as she watched Sophia's performance from the corner of her eye. But humiliation only works on people who haven't already lost everything that mattered. What they didn't know was that Elena had secrets, deadly secrets that would soon turn their world upside down. The first humiliation. The orientation session in the cathedral-like auditorium was where Elena first faced the Academy's brutal social hierarchy directly. Admiral Catherine Hayes, the silver-haired director with decades of distinguished service, stood at the podium with military bearing. "Welcome to Skyline Aviation Academy," she began, voice carrying easily through the vast space. "The Arctic doesn't care about your bank account or family name. Up there, competence is the only currency that matters." When Elena was called to introduce herself, she walked to the microphone with steady steps and spoke in a clear, quiet voice. "My name is Elena Rivers. I'm here to learn Arctic rescue operations. I've worked as a technical flight engineer, and I believe aviation should serve those who need it most, not just those who can afford it." The silence that followed was broken by Sophia's theatrical applause, slow and sarcastic. "How inspiring," she said, rising with fluid grace. A regular working-class hero. As Alina turned to leave the podium, Sophia stepped into her path, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Oops," she said with false sweetness as she deliberately stumbled, sending hot liquid splashing across Alina's worn leather jacket. "How clumsy of me. I hope that old thing wasn't important." The auditorium erupted in nervous laughter as Alina stood there, coffee dripping onto pristine carpet. But Alina didn't react with anger or tears as Sophia expected. Instead, she calmly removed the jacket, examining the damage with the practiced eyes of someone who had learned to make do. From her duffel bag, Elena retrieved her small sewing kit, red thread bright against worn leather, as she began carefully stitching a small tear near the collar. Captain David Grant, watching from the back, noticed something that made his blood run cold. As Elena worked, a military patch became visible on the jacket's inner lining. Faded fabric with barely legible markings. MH14. The auditorium fell silent as Elena finished her repair work, her movements precise and unhurried despite the humiliation she had just endured. In Kandahar, we called it Ghost Protocol. Elena remembered as her needle pulled the red thread through worn leather. When a mission went dark and the official record showed KA, but the operative kept working from the shadows. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez had been my cover identity for the investigation. She died in that helicopter crash along with my squadron. But Elena Rivers was born from the ashes, carrying their memory and the evidence they died protecting. 3 years of building this new identity. 3 years of patience, all leading to this moment. It was then, as Elena cleaned the remaining coffee stains with quiet dignity, that she whispered something under her breath that made Captain Grant's face go pale. Something about Kandahar that no student pilot should know. Hidden expertise. Dawn came early to Skyline's massive hangars, where students stumbled through darkness toward the fleet of military surplus aircraft that would either make or break their Arctic flying careers. The C-130 Hercules dominated Hangar 7 like a sleeping giant, its 4 turboprop engines gleaming under harsh work lights. Captain Grant addressed the assembled students with the quiet authority of a combat veteran, his grey eyes missing nothing as they swept over eager faces. "This machine will keep you alive up there," he said, voice echoing in the cavernous space, "but only if you respect it, understand it, and never underestimate what it can do." Elena's technical knowledge became apparent during the first week of intensive training. She moved through cockpit systems with confidence that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than textbook learning. When Amy Foster asked about radar calibration, Elena answered with precision that made instructors take notice. The system requires manual sensitivity adjustment for Arctic conditions. Ice formations create false returns if you don't compensate properly. Her casual use of military designation codes instead of civilian terminology raised eyebrows among technicians. But Elena seemed unaware of the attention she was drawing. Amy Foster found herself increasingly torn between her natural empathy and social survival instincts. The daughter of a high school principal and a nurse, she occupied middle ground between Elena's poverty and her classmates' wealth, making her acutely aware of the academy's brutal hierarchy. During lunch that first week, she watched Elena sit alone at a corner table, methodically eating while reading technical manuals. Amy picked up her tray, started toward Elena's table, then caught Sophia's warning glare from across the dining hall. She stopped mid-stride, torn between doing what was right and protecting herself from social exile. After a moment of internal struggle, Amy compromised with her conscience. She walked past Elena's table and deliberately left a wrapped sandwich and apple from her meal tray, never making eye contact, but hoping Elena would understand the small gesture of solidarity. Elena noticed, of course, but said nothing, simply nodding slightly when Amy wasn't looking. It was the beginning of a friendship that would grow slowly, carefully, in the shadows of the Academy's social warfare. Sophia watched Elena's technical displays with growing fury, her perfect features twisted into barely concealed rage. During breaks, Sophia cornered other students with honeyed malice. "You know she's probably cheating somehow," she whispered. "People like that always take shortcuts because they can't compete on merit." Marcus contributed his own theory, lounging in the student lounge. "I heard she was dishonorably discharged. Military doesn't just let people go for no reason. People need their comfortable lives," Elena reflected during another solitary dinner, watching her classmates cluster in their exclusive groups. They'd rather believe in elaborate conspiracies than accept that competence doesn't require a trust fund. But Elena had learned patience in Afghanistan. Patience was a weapon she wielded with deadly precision. And these privileged children had no idea they were being studied by someone who understood the long game better than they understood their own motivations. The breaking point. It was during emergency procedure simulation that Elena's expertise became impossible to ignore. The scenario involved complete electrical failure over the Beaufort Sea, requiring manual navigation using backup instruments and dead reckoning. While other students struggled with calculations, Elena worked through the crisis with methodical precision. Her understanding of Arctic weather patterns surprisingly sophisticated. Captain Grant watched from the observation deck, noting how she handled equipment with familiarity that belonged to experienced combat pilots rather than civilian students. Late that night, Elena sat alone in her room with topographical maps spread across her small desk, her finger tracing Arctic routes that held painful memories. She remembered Captain Jake Rodriguez, her co-pilot during that final classified mission 3 years ago. The official report listed mechanical failure as the cause of their crash, but Elena knew better. The helicopter's maintenance had been contracted to a subsidiary of Blackwood Industries, cutting corners to maximize profits on military contracts. Jake died because corporate executives chose shareholder value over pilot safety, and Elena had spent 3 years gathering evidence to prove it. Jake used to say that justice wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure the next guy doesn't die the same way. Elena whispered to the empty room, her voice barely audible above the Arctic wind outside her window. "I didn't survive that crash by accident. I survived to finish what we started. The truth doesn't die just because good people do." The breaking point came when Elena not only completed a particularly difficult navigation exercise flawlessly, but also identified critical errors in the official flight manual that could have led to dangerous mistakes in actual Arctic conditions. Sophia's composure cracked during the post-exercise debrief as she stood and pointed an accusing finger. "This is ridiculous," she declared, voice shaking with rage. "Nobody knows this much without cheating. I demand her background be investigated thoroughly." When the technician asked Elena how she knew the radar's classified military designation, she simply smiled and said, "Lucky guess." But Captain Grant was already reaching for his encrypted phone. Admiral Hayes arrived for what should have been a routine inspection, but found herself dealing with questions that had no easy answers. Elena Rivers' file contained frustrating gaps. Security clearances mysteriously absent. Employment records reduced to single-line entries. References unavailable for comment. In 30 years of military service, Hayes had developed instincts for when something was out of place, and Elena represented an anomaly that demanded explanation, sabotage, and revelation. The sabotage began subtly. Navigation instruments malfunctioning during critical exercises. Radio communications interrupted by mysterious interference. Assigned aircraft developing mechanical problems that grounded Elena during important training flights. But Elena adapted to each setback with improvisation that came from real experience, fixing problems that should have required professional maintenance and finding workarounds that impressed skeptical instructors. Sophia grew bolder, spending hours researching Elena's background through her family's resources, finding only deeper mystery. Elena Rivers seemed to have appeared from nowhere 3 years ago. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that Sophia's phone rang with a call that would change everything. Her father's voice crackled through the encrypted connection, fury evident even through the static. "Sophia, what the hell is going on up there? I'm getting reports that some scholarship nobody is making you look like an amateur. Robert Blackwood's tone carried the kind of controlled rage that Sophia had learned to fear since childhood. If you can't handle one poor girl, what good are you to me? The Arctic operations are too important for you to screw up over your wounded pride. Sophia stood alone on her dormitory balcony after the call ended, Arctic wind cutting through her expensive coat as she stared out at the endless white landscape. For the first time in her privileged life, she felt the crushing weight of being nothing more than a chess piece in someone else's game. Her father didn't care about her education or her feelings. She was just another asset to be deployed in service of Blackwood Industries' expansion into Arctic territories. The discovery of deliberate sabotage came when Amy finally broke her silence, approaching Captain Grant after watching Sophia plant faulty equipment in Elena's compartment. "They're trying to get her killed," Amy told Grant, voice shaking with suppressed emotion. "Sophia did something to Elena's navigation system. I saw her." The revelation elevated the situation from bullying to criminal endangerment, prompting emergency security protocols that included constant supervision of student activities. Captain Grant found himself in an impossible position, officially required to investigate while privately suspecting that Elena Rivers was far more than she appeared. Late one night, he made a decision that would either end his career or help solve a mystery that had haunted him for years. He found Elena in the Academy Library past midnight, surrounded by technical manuals and topographical charts, her concentration so intense she didn't notice his approach until he pulled up a chair beside her. "I knew a pilot once," Grant said quietly, his voice barely audible in the library's silence. "Best Arctic rescue specialist I ever served with. She died 3 years ago in a helicopter crash that was blamed on mechanical failure. But the maintenance records disappeared before anyone could investigate properly." Elena's hand stilled on the pages she was reading, but she didn't look up. "I lost a good friend because of corporate corner cutting, and I've been carrying that guilt ever since. If someone wanted to finish what she started, they'd have my full support." Elena finally raised her eyes to meet Grant's steady gaze, and for a moment, the mask of humble scholarship student slipped completely. "Some investigations require patience, Captain," she said simply. "And some truths are worth waiting for." Grant nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without need for explicit confirmation. "Well then," he said, standing to leave, "I suppose I should make sure our navigation equipment gets proper oversight from now on. Can't have students working with faulty instruments. They think justice comes with badges and warrants," Elena thought as she watched Grant disappear into the library stacks. "But real justice is when the weak can sleep peacefully because someone stood watch in the darkness. I didn't choose to become a legend. I chose not to let the truth die with my teammates." The storm of truth. The Arctic storm sweeping across northern Alaska in early March was the kind of weather system that made meteorologists issue emergency warnings and aviation authorities ground entire fleets. Satellite imagery showed a massive low-pressure system generating 70 miles per hour winds and temperatures dropping below -40 degrees Fahrenheit. For students at Skyline Academy, it represented the ultimate test. For some, it would become life or death. Emergency protocols suspended all training flights when conditions deteriorated beyond safe parameters. But the storm's rapid intensification caught research teams off guard. A geological survey crew near Prudhoe Bay was stranded with helicopter mechanical problems, while marine biologists studying Arctic char populations were trapped at a remote station as weather made evacuation impossible. Within hours, routine training became genuine rescue operations requiring every available aircraft and pilot. In the operations center, Captain Grant studied weather maps with the familiar tension that came with high-stakes missions. The stranded teams were running low on heating fuel and emergency supplies, their communications increasingly desperate as the storm intensified. Standard protocols called for military assistance, but the nearest Air Force base was dealing with its own weather emergencies. Grant outlined rescue parameters to assembled students, explaining that standard flight paths would be impossible due to storm severity. Elena raised her hand and offered an alternative approach that accounted for Arctic wind patterns and thermal layers not covered in civilian manuals. The conventional route ignores the pressure gradient differential, she said, moving to the weather display. If we adjust for thermal inversion layers and use the storm's rotation to our advantage, we can reach both sites with acceptable risk parameters. Grant stared at her proposed flight path, recognizing tactical thinking that belonged to military special operations rather than student training. The tension in the room became palpable as Grant publicly challenged Elena's assessment, their arguments serving as cover for the unofficial transfer of command authority that both knew was necessary. That route is completely unacceptable, Rivers, Grant declared, his voice carrying across the operations center. We don't deviate from established protocols just because a student has theories about weather patterns. Elena's response was equally forceful. With respect, Captain, established protocols are designed for normal conditions. This storm is generating wind shear patterns that will tear apart any aircraft following standard approaches. Their heated exchange drew attention from other students who had never seen Elena challenge authority so directly. Amy watched the argument with growing understanding that Elena's quiet compliance had been an act. Underneath the humble exterior was someone accustomed to making life and death decisions under extreme pressure. The discussion ended when Elena presented meteorological data that supported her tactical assessment, forcing Grant to acknowledge her expertise while maintaining his official authority. Meanwhile, Sophia found herself facing a crisis no amount of family wealth could solve. Her phone buzzed urgently with a call from Robert Blackwood, his voice cutting through static with barely controlled panic. Sophia, listen carefully. There are people trapped at the Prado base site. My people. If they don't make it back, everything we've built is finished. Do you understand me? Everything. The line went dead, leaving Sophia staring at her phone with the dawning realization that her father's illegal operations had put lives at risk, and now those same lives represented the only evidence that could destroy their family empire. Into the storm. The aircraft selected for the mission was the C-130 Hercules Elena had studied with unusual intensity throughout her academy time. As pre-flight procedures began, her familiarity with the systems became impossible to ignore. She moved through the cockpit with the confidence of someone who had flown this aircraft before, finding controls without hesitation, understanding capabilities that extended far beyond civilian training programs. Grant found himself in the unusual position of officially commanding while secretly relying on Elena's tactical expertise. When she suggested specific modifications to their approach that would avoid the worst turbulence while still reaching stranded personnel, their public argument provided cover for private coordination that would save lives. The other students watched in fascination as Elena and Grant conducted what appeared to be heated disagreement, but was actually sophisticated information transfer between experienced operators. The moment of truth came as they prepared for takeoff, with Elena in the navigator's seat while Sophia and other students occupied passenger positions in the cargo hold. Wind howled across the runway with such intensity that the massive aircraft shuddered even while stationary. Elena's voice came through the intercom, calm and professional, as she called out navigation waypoints and weather updates, her communications carrying authority that hadn't been there before. Amy strapped herself into her safety harness, watching Elena work with growing admiration for someone who remained steady under pressure that was making everyone else visibly nervous. She had chosen to fly on this dangerous mission partly out of solidarity with Elena, and partly because she couldn't live with herself if she stayed safe while others risked their lives for people in need. Before takeoff, Elena muttered instructions to herself using terminology that belonged to military special operations. Haven't taken off in conditions like this since my last run over the Hindu Kush. Captain Grant realized he was flying with a ghost. The C-130 lifted into the Arctic storm with Elena's voice guiding them through conditions that would have grounded civilian aircraft indefinitely. The massive plane bucked and rolled through layers of turbulence, ice forming on wings faster than de-icing systems could clear it, while visibility dropped to near zero in swirling snow. In the cargo hold, Sophia gripped her safety harness with white knuckles, her usual composure shattered by the realization that her family's darkest secrets were about to be exposed at 10,000 feet above frozen wasteland. Elena's navigation proved invaluable as they pushed through weather that exceeded all safety parameters, her understanding of Arctic conditions and aircraft performance keeping them on course when instruments failed and standard procedures became useless. Captain Grant maintained official command while following Elena's recommendations, recognizing expertise that belonged to someone with extensive combat experience rather than civilian training. Her casual references to classified navigation procedures and military call signs confirmed suspicions that had been building for months. Real pilots don't fly by instruments alone, Elena thought as she guided them through the worst turbulence any of them had ever experienced. You fly by feel, by instinct, by understanding that the machine is an extension of your will. These rich kids learn to trust technology, but technology fails when you need it most. In Afghanistan, we learned to trust ourselves. Emergency radio traffic crackled through their headsets with increasing urgency, ground controllers desperate for updates on rescue operations becoming more critical by the hour. Stranded personnel at multiple sites were running dangerously low on supplies, their survival dependent on aircraft struggling to operate in impossible conditions. When Elena responded to one particularly urgent transmission, her reply contained information that required the highest level of security clearance. The storm reached peak intensity as they approached the first rescue site, wind speeds exceeding 80 miles per hour and visibility reduced to less than 50 feet. Elena's skills became literally a matter of life and death, her ability to read weather patterns and predict aircraft performance the only thing standing between successful rescue and catastrophic failure. She guided the C-130 through conditions that should have been impossible, her voice never wavering as she called out corrections that kept them alive. Sophia's world began collapsing as she understood the implications of Elena's expertise, her mind racing through months of events and recognizing careful planning that had brought them to this moment. Elena hadn't stumbled into Skyline by accident. She had been placed there deliberately, using scholarship status as cover, while gathering evidence about illegal Arctic activities. The woman Sophia tormented as a charity case was someone with skills and authority to destroy the Blackwood family completely. The radio transmission that changed everything came as they descended toward the first rescue site, cutting through storm static with unmistakable authority and barely contained emotion. Icehawk, this is Arctic Base. We've been waiting 3 years for you to come home. Justice served. Elena executed an impossible landing on storm-lashed ice near the Prudhoe Bay drilling platform, the C-130 touching down on an improvised runway of packed snow that supported the massive aircraft through nothing more than her precise calculation of load distribution and intimate knowledge of Arctic conditions. In the cargo hold, Sophia watched through a porthole as her father's illegal drilling operation came into view. Industrial machinery stark against white landscape. Realizing her family's criminal empire was about to be exposed dramatically, Robert Blackwood stood among stranded workers, expensive Arctic gear, unable to hide the fear in his eyes as he recognized the military aircraft that had somehow managed to land in impossible conditions. At 58, Blackwood had built his oil empire through political connections, environmental violations, and carefully orchestrated cover-ups, but he had never faced anything like federal investigators literally dropping from the sky. Elena's transformation from humble student to commanding federal agent was complete as she emerged from the aircraft, bearing unmistakably military authority, absolute in the emergency situation. She coordinated evacuation of stranded personnel, while simultaneously documenting evidence of environmental crimes hidden from regulatory oversight. Her worn leather jacket now revealed itself as a badge of honor, bearing insignia of elite military units. Agent Maria Santos from the Environmental Protection Agency stepped out of the rescue aircraft behind Elena, her federal credentials visible as she began photographing the illegal drilling equipment. Santos had been coordinating with Elena for months, building the legal framework that would ensure Blackwood's conviction on multiple federal charges. "We've been tracking this operation through satellite imagery and financial records," Santos explained to the stranded workers. "Anyone willing to testify about safety violations and environmental damage will receive full witness protection." The confrontation took place in the drilling platform's command center while the storm raged outside and federal agents secured evidence. Blackwood attempted his usual dominance through wealth and connections, but found himself facing someone immune to both intimidation and bribery. "Who the hell are you to interfere with my operations?" he demanded, voice shaking with rage and desperation. Elena's response was delivered with cold professionalism. "Someone who's been waiting 3 years to ask you about the environmental inspectors who died investigating your illegal activities." Sophia watched in horror as Elena produced a digital recording device, her father's voice crystal clear despite the howling wind outside. "If they die, then insurance covers it. We keep drilling regardless of environmental impact." The recording had captured a conference call from 3 years earlier when Blackwood discussed the deaths of regulators who had discovered his violations. Sophia staggered backward, hitting the control panel behind her as the full implications hit her. "How long have you had this?" she asked, her voice barely audible above wind through the platform's structure. Elena's cold eyes met Sophia's as she responded with devastating finality. 3 years. And I didn't fly here to apologize." Agent Santos stepped forward with additional evidence, spreading photographs and documents across the control room's metal table. "We have recordings of 14 separate conversations discussing bribes, cover-ups, and deliberate safety violations. We have financial records showing payments to officials who suppressed investigations. We have witness testimony from workers who were threatened into silence." Robert Blackwood's face went white as the scope of the evidence became clear. "You can't prove any of this in court," he sputtered, but his voice lacked conviction. Elena's response was immediate and crushing. "We don't have to prove it in court, Robert. We already have. The grand jury handed down indictments yesterday. You're under arrest for conspiracy, environmental terrorism, and criminally negligent homicide." The satisfaction in Elena's voice was unmistakable as she watched a decade of corruption finally meet justice. The truth revealed. Amy observed the arrest operations from the aircraft's cargo door, finally understanding the full scope of what she had witnessed over the past months. Elena hadn't just been enduring bullying. She had been conducting one of the most sophisticated federal investigations in Alaska's history. The woman Amy had tried to protect with small acts of kindness was actually someone whose courage had protected the entire Arctic ecosystem from destruction. The arrival of the second C-130 confirmed that the rescue mission had been coordinated with law enforcement operations extending across multiple jurisdictions. Federal agents emerged from the aircraft with Arctic protective gear and arrest warrants, the storm providing perfect cover for the largest environmental crime bust in Alaska's history. Marcus found himself detained as a material witness, his family's investment banking operations having financed Blackwood's illegal activities through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Agent Santos approached Sophia as her father was led away in handcuffs, his political connections and vast wealth powerless against Elena's carefully gathered evidence. "Ms. Blackwood, you have a choice to make," Santos said quietly. "You can continue protecting your family's criminal enterprise, or you can help us expose the full extent of the corruption. Either way, your father is going to prison. The only question is whether you want to be there with him." Sophia stood in the swirling snow, watching her world collapse as Elena supervised the evidence collection with professional efficiency. The scholarship student they had mocked for poverty had proven herself richer in honor and genuine worth than all of them combined. For the first time in her privileged life, Sophia understood what it meant to face real consequences for her choices. A message arrived on Agent Santos's encrypted device as the arrests concluded. An email from Isabella Martinez, widow of Environmental Inspector Carlos Martinez, who had died investigating Blackwood Industries 3 years earlier. Agent Santos, please tell the pilot who brought justice for my husband that our family will never forget her courage. Carlos always said that the truth would find a way to fly, even in the darkest storms. As federal agents emerged from the second C-130 with arrest warrants, Sophia realized that Elena hadn't just been hiding her identity. She'd been playing the longest game of justice imaginable. And everyone had been her pawns. Wings for the forgotten. 6 months after the dramatic Prado Bay arrests, Skyline Aviation Academy had transformed completely, reflecting broader changes in Arctic aviation training and environmental enforcement. Admiral Hayes announced the Wings for the Forgotten Scholarship Program, funded by assets seized from criminal enterprises and designed to provide opportunities for students whose backgrounds had previously excluded them. Elena Rivers served as the program's first director, having chosen to leave active federal service to train the next generation of Arctic rescue pilots. Elena stood before her diverse new class in the same auditorium where Sophia had once humiliated her with spilled coffee. The room buzzed with different energy now. Serious discussion of rescue techniques, environmental protection, and ethical aviation practices had replaced the cruel laughter and social exclusion of the past. Among her students were children of workers she had rescued during the Prado Bay operation. Young people whose dreams of flying had been made possible by the destruction of the criminal network that threatened their families. This is what justice looks like, Elena thought as she watched her students collaborate on a navigation exercise, rich and poor working together without regard for social hierarchies. Not the moment of arrest or the courtroom verdict, but this, when the next generation learns that competence and character matter more than bank accounts and family names. Sophia Blackwood sat in the back row, designer clothes replaced by simple flight gear, previous arrogance transformed into quiet determination. The collapse of her family's oil empire had stripped away financial advantages but revealed character reserves hidden beneath privilege and entitlement. Some students initially protested her presence, arguing that criminals' children didn't deserve second chances, but Elena's firm support had silenced the complaints. She chose to testify against her own father, Elena had told the objectors. That takes more courage than most of us will ever need. Amy served as Elena's assistant instructor, her middle-class background and natural empathy making her an effective bridge between students from different circumstances. She worked particularly with scholarship students, helping them navigate social challenges while maintaining professional focus. Her experience witnessing Elena's treatment had taught her the importance of standing up for what was right, regardless of social pressure. I learned from Elena that real strength isn't about who you know or what you own, Amy would tell new students. It's about who you choose to be when everything is on the line. Elena's teaching philosophy centered on understanding the human cost of corruption and the responsibility that came with aviation skills. Flying isn't just about technical competence, she would tell students, standing beside the memorial wall that now honored environmental inspectors and workers who died because of corporate negligence. It's about using your abilities to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Every time you take off, you carry the trust of people who depend on your integrity. On a clear spring morning, Elena stood beside a C-130 Hercules, preparing for an advanced training flight with her students. The aircraft gleamed in Alaskan sunshine, engines warming with the familiar whine that had become the soundtrack of her new life. Among students preparing for flight were Maria Martinez Jr., daughter of the inspector whose death had motivated Elena's investigation, and Thomas Chen, son of a worker who had nearly died in one of Blackwood's unsafe operations. Elena conducted the pre-flight briefing with authority earned through competence and courage rather than inheritance or political influence. Today's exercise would simulate emergency landing on unstable ice. The kind of situation that required split-second decisions and absolute trust between pilot and crew. Remember, she told her students as they performed equipment checks, in the Arctic, there's no room for ego or individual heroics. We succeed together, or we don't succeed at all. Some people think legends are born from single moments of heroism. Elena reflected as she watched her students work with the kind of teamwork that had been impossible under the Academy's old social hierarchy. But real legends are built from thousands of small choices. Choosing truth over comfort, justice over convenience, service over self-interest. I didn't become Ice Hawk in one dramatic moment. I became her through years of deciding that other lives mattered more than my own safety. Maria Martinez Jr. approached Elena as they prepared to board the aircraft, her young face serious with the weight of family history. "Miss Rivers," she said quietly, "my mom wanted me to give you this." She handed Elena a small wooden cross, worn smooth by years of handling. "It was my father's. Mom says he would want you to carry it because you finished what he started." Elena accepted the gift with hands that weren't quite steady, the simple wooden cross representing more honor than any military decoration. The training flight proceeded perfectly, with Elena's students demonstrating skills that would have been impossible under the Academy's previous regime of privilege and exclusion. Sophia executed a flawless emergency landing simulation, her technical competence matched by genuine concern for her teammates' safety. Amy coordinated rescue communications with professional efficiency, her voice carrying confidence born from knowing her worth wasn't determined by others' opinions. As they returned to base, Elena's radio crackled with a message from Agent Santos. "Ice Hawk, this is Environmental Base. We just got word that the Alaskan Environmental Protection Act passed the Senate. The legislation you helped inspire is now law. Thought you should know that your teammates' sacrifice is going to protect the Arctic for generations to come." Elena pulled on her helmet, signaled to her students, and walked toward the aircraft that would carry them into the clear Arctic sky, where legends were born not from single acts of heroism, but from the daily choice to serve something greater than themselves. True strength isn't about where you come from or what you own. It's about who you choose to be when the storm hits, Elena announced to her students as they completed post-flight procedures. Sometimes the people we look down on are the very ones carrying the wings that will save us all. Justice may fly quietly, but it always finds its landing strip. Thank you for joining us on Everyday Life Stories. If you enjoyed this incredible tale of hidden courage and ultimate justice, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. We bring you the most amazing real-life stories that will inspire, shock, and move you. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.